So I'll try to be quick as not to trespass on the time for Brian and the rapidly dwindling time that we have left here. Dataplan.org is a nonprofit organization that I started and co-founded with some friends and colleagues. We try to do some research and analysis based on internet activity, what we can see and observe and measure. So I won't go too much into that. You can read about it later. There's a network that we've built mostly from virtual machines and dedicated servers. We have about 500 nodes that we call sensor nodes across literally over 100 different hosting provider networks. So it's a little bit different than some of the other platforms like an Atlas or NLNOG Ring, where we more or less have contractual control over these nodes to do sorts of things we want. So we do some research experiments with academics who can do things that might not otherwise be able to do elsewhere. We have some nodes that listen passively just to observe what they see on the internet. So they don't necessarily advertise any service, they don't originate any traffic, what's sort of the unsolicited activity we get. So one of the things that we look at is just to see, do we get anyone who's scanning or trying to send mail. So SMTP is not necessarily that exciting of a protocol, but it was one that I was kind of looking through this weekend before I came, and I put together some pictures for us to look at. So there's about a 3-month window of data from last year at this time. There's 27 million plus events, which means there was a TCP connection made to one of these nodes. That's an event. There was a receipt to command. That's an event. There was a data command. That's an event, and so forth. So we don't collect the body data, but we collected essentially everything about the SMP transaction. We wanted to take a look at it. Here's our map. It's a little, I think it's a little hard to see the actual world map, but we have stuff all over the place. That's what basically that says there. The first thing I looked at is all the connections and the events that we see. What is the source port used by the remote client? And this is actually kind of interesting because I think it would have been different about 20 years ago. The vast majority of things that are touching our machines tend to use that registered, or the private unregistered source port number starting at 49,152. Not too surprising there. There's a few kind of interesting bumps I'll be happy to tell you about offline if you care to see me about it. And then I started to look at what do our sensors see? So on the y-axis is a integer representation of all the IPv4 address space. And so we have nodes pretty well dispersed through the address space. Along the x-axis is just a matter of time. So over this 3-month period, there was one host that touched the largest number of our sensors. And here's kind of how we saw it. There's 3 separate periods of time, or 3 separate days, where it looks like they just essentially scan the internet. And so you can see we're pretty well represented throughout the address space, so we saw it basically everywhere. We took a look at our busiest, the IP address that we saw the most of all of our sensors, and it looks kind of random. It's kind of all over the place. We saw it everywhere. We saw it for about a period of 3 or so weeks. You wouldn't necessarily know by looking at this graph it was the busiest, but I can tell you that what it was doing was sending lots and lots of receipt to commands and huge lists of destination email addresses. So clearly trying to send sort of spam to large numbers of recipients. This was weird. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but there was one host that was literally scanning 3 destination addresses for a long period of time every day for a while. And then at some point decided to, I'm just going to scan the whole internet. And then so we saw pretty much everywhere towards the end. I'm not sure, maybe somebody fixed something. Maybe that's what went on there. This is really interesting. If you know who Shadow Server is, they do lots of scanning of internet services. And they scan basically every IP address that they can, every single day, once a day. And so we see them all the time. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they generate lots and lots of traffic. We just see them. And they are very consistent. You can see this graph is pretty, almost perfectly filled in. The white horizontal spaces just means we don't have address coverage there. So 127, whatever that maps to as an integer, is clearly a horizontal white space there. And some other places that we're just not located in the /8. Census is another organization that does a lot of scanning. They're maybe a little bit less visible in some cases, but they have almost as good as coverage too. You can kind of make out a little bit more of where we are not, just because the frequency they're scanning isn't quite as significant as maybe shadow servers is. Another company that does a lot, looks kind of like a tire tread, is internetmeasurement.com. They also have pretty good coverage, but you can see their average rate of appearance on our network is even a little bit less. If we picked out one of the shadow server source IP addresses, because they use over 600 source IP addresses to do their scanning, looks kind of random. So I don't know exactly how they operate. I haven't talked to them, but presumably they sort of dispatch some random set of unique IP addresses every day to each one of their nodes, and eventually they fill in the whole plot, if we were to count up all the 600 plus that I showed you a few slides ago. Then we took a look at, okay, let's take some of these groups together, the top one being shadow server, census, Shodan is another popular one, our busiest node down the very bottom that we looked at a few slides ago, and who's sort of generating the most out of this representative group. Shadow server by far dominates most days. You can see a couple of outlier events here. When that really busy node, if we scroll back to that plot where you saw the 3 separate days where it was doing a heavy scanning, they dominated the number of events that we saw for that day. So they show up as red, and shadow server looks like they show up a lot less. Shadow server didn't really change, they're just dwarfed by the really frequent scanners there. And there's another interesting event I'll point out that at some point shadow server appears to have scanned maybe more, or census scanned a little bit less. That's the top upper left portion there. But if you actually look back, and I'll just show you real quick, the census, you kind of see this horizontal white space a little bit towards the left part of the graph. Something happened there, I think. Maybe they had some maintenance or outage, and so that's reflected there. So I think that's what was going on. It's not that shadow server did more. I think census did a little bit less. So it's kind of interesting. I hope maybe this stimulates some questions or ideas that you might have for us to do some network observation measurement thing, or if you're an academic, some research work that you'd like for us to help you with. This is the sort of stuff that we do, and we got lots and lots of data like this. So here's my contact info if you care to contact me offline, or if you're remote, please do so, or I'll be out in the hall for the next couple of days to be happy to have a conversation with you. Brian? Thanks.